County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many others, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of our growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you're a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler's checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home, provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
Hello, my name is Donna Parikka. I'm a Tarrant County Master Gardener, and today I would like to help you learn more about ornamental grasses and why you should be considering them for use in your Texas residential landscape. I'm assuming that most of you have an interest in your personal landscape and are wanting to create a new garden, or maybe you just want to make changes to an existing one. Some of you may love gardening. Some of you may feel it's just another household chore, and then some of you may be hiring a professional to maintain your landscape. Either way, I think this information will be useful to anyone that is desiring curb appeal or just wants the aesthetics of a nice gardening space while keeping your environmental concerns in mind. So just what is an ornamental grass? Grasses that are grown for a decorative purpose in a landscape are called ornamental grasses. They're not a turf grass, nor are they generally used for livestock forage. A true grass is a member of the Gramineae family, but most of us generally include their close relatives, known as sedges, reeds, and rushes when speaking of ornamental grasses. Of course, this is understandable because they look alike. In addition to other lookalikes, known as mondo, liriope, yucca, and lilies, they're not generally included when you're speaking of ornamental grasses because their management differs. They can be used as a texture change just like we use ornamental grasses, however. Okay, a good landscape usually includes a mixture of hardscape trees, evergreens, turf grass, perennials, and annuals. Almost all ornamental grasses are perennials. So if you're contemplating using them in your landscape, remember to compare and use them in place of other perennials. There are many benefits of using ornamental grasses in your landscape. Let's first look at some of just the aesthetic benefits and latest trends. One item is grasses provide a needed texture change in the landscape for contrast against your more rounded spreading foliage of evergreens and perennials. Soft billowing grasses like a fountain grass contrast well with the stronger form such as a common evergreen like the dwarf Burford holly. Upright switchgrass contrasts with more rounded shapes like a Russian sage. Edging grass, a lot like mondo, can soften with a low mounding habit. Another advantage is they can provide color variation and fluorescence. They have consistent foliage cover as well as bloom color, and the fluorescence they provide with the backdrop from a setting sun is just really beautiful. Another item they can do for you is they can provide a height variation. Ornamental grasses can vary from as low as 4 inches to 7 feet, and sometimes taller if they're under good conditions. Another thing that is pleasing about an ornamental grass in your landscape is the movement. They have a motion in the swaying wind or the breezes. Another thing is they can soften your hardscape area. Hardscapes such as foundations, sidewalks, porches, patios, decks, etc. can all look more pleasing with the help of an ornamental grass. They also can provide year-round color, and at the end of the growing season, the golden foliage has landscape interest during those dormant months, unlike some of your other perennials, which leave a bare area. Another current trend is what has been called a naturalized setting, and it is an increasingly popular landscape style, even to the point that some of these landscapes can have a prairie-like look. The use of ornamental grasses is a big part of this trend towards a more naturalized landscape. Grasses can drape over or against companion plantings for a more naturalized look. Meadow, woodland, and prairie settings gardens may even be more popular in the future because they are environmentally superior to other landscapes, especially the tropical foliages, because they require so much irrigation. Let's talk a minute about the important environmental benefits of native grasses. This is especially important now that there has been so much publicity and we're currently in a drought. The grasses, they're a great alternative to other evergreens and perennials, especially if you're using a native species. Some species can actually survive without supplemental irrigation. So always be concerned with that in your landscape. Maybe you want to consider these grasses with that in mind. Another important thing about grasses, native grasses, is they have very deep roots, especially the Texas native varieties. So that makes them very good for erosion control in the prairie and therefore useful in a landscape, both residential, commercial, and along highways. Another thing to consider, and this is being talked about a lot now also, it's very important with the climate change that we're going through. Climate and flood changes, they're really occurring, and when planning, ask yourself, is my yard sustainable in the future? Ornamental grasses should be a consideration because of their longevity. Another issue you want to deal with is possible reduction of the turf grass areas in your yard. Turf grasses will be less possible as future water available reaches critical stages. More residential as well as commercial landscapes will seek to reduce water usage by converting to tolerant alternatives such as ornamental grasses. Another thing that is an advantage is that ornamental grasses are attractive to wildlife, especially birds that use them for shelter, nests, and food. Native grasses adapt easily, and they do not require soil amendments for the most part. And the final thing we want to mention here is, kind of in summary, the growth requirements of ornamental grasses meet what we call the earth kind objectives. And those objectives are to use less water, less fertilizer, less insecticides, and herbicides. Here is another of one of those dreaded PowerPoint bullet, but I want to use this just a minute. Here's another set of benefits, and this is mostly related to you as the gardener, and I'm going to call it user benefits. Grasses are pretty maintenance free. They do require once a year pruning, but once a year is not very bad. Then they require little irrigation. They can require no fertilizing, no insecticides, herbicides, no mowing. So that, as far as from the gardener's perspective, those are good advantages. Another thing they can do for you is they can provide a good privacy screen and a way to section off use areas in the landscape. Of course, this will apply to all but immediately after your spring pruning. Another advantage is economical. Ornamental grasses, their initial cost is average or below other perennials. And once planted, they are very hardy and can be divided to make new plants. If we're going to talk about advantages, it's only fair that we bring up the subject of the disadvantages of any plant. So we're going to do that. We're going to just talk a minute here about the disadvantages with ornamental grasses, so you'll be aware. Some of the ornamental grass varieties can be invasive, and they do this by reseeding or spreading via rhizomes. You have to also know that most varieties are not shade tolerant, and they may not thrive in shady conditions. Some varieties may thin out as they age, especially if conditions are unsuitable. You have to always remember pruning is required once a year to maintain the plant at its optimum. If not, they will look unhealthy because the prior year brown foliage will still be present. Dividing is required when the center dies out and the new growth becomes sparse. One thing about this disadvantage is this, on most varieties, doesn't happen for as many as 10 years. Our demonstration garden here at the Tarrant County Master Gardeners has been in existence for 12 years, and none of the grasses have ever been divided. I want to spend a little while explaining to you a lot of the useful ways that these plants can be used in your landscape. And here's just a listing that we're going to look at each item in a little bit more detail here in a minute. But from this listing, I think you'll see, just by looking at this quickly in your mind, all the different ways that these can be used. These two photographs will help me explain a little bit about some of the ways that they can be used in your landscape. What we call a naturalized or a prairie look or a wildflower area. A very popular trend right now, which is a positive environmental achievement, especially since it reduces the size of turf grass. The left photo is a prairie look, but not barren at all because of the good use of the foliage. Now, an area like this yard could also be sectioned off, and you could add turf for family use areas, sports, children play areas, etc., and still maintain some of your yard to look like this. The front yard on the right is more of a woodland mix of flowering plants and a good naturalized hardscape along the grasses. And this is a front yard. I did one of backyard and one of a front yard to kind of illustrate the objective here. Here's another example of changing your landscape and using ornamental grasses. The front yard photo on the left is a very modern, slightly minimalistic, but an all-grass landscape, or I say an all-ornamental grass landscape, can be very low maintenance and environmentally friendly. The backyard photo on the right, it retains turf grass for the homeowner use areas, such as recreation, sports, or the play area. Another way to use an ornamental grass is as an accent or a focal point. The photo on the left in the background is a maiden grass, and it's being utilized here as a color and a texture change in this island bed. The foreground has zebra grass. That's the tallest grass in that bed, and it's being used as an accent, but it provides a height and a texture change as well, and it keeps the bed asymmetrical, which I think is important in designing a landscape. The photo on the right, the medium-sized grass here, is used as a specimen, and it serves to accent the area in an asymmetrical way also, and it provides a texture change and a softening of the hardscape, and I think it's used quite effectively here. Here's another example of an ornamental grass used on a smaller scale, and I wanted to show you this so I can illustrate if you have small areas and how to incorporate grasses. Here the color and texture provides that solution for a smaller area. The Russian sage, verbena, and an artemisia, they are perfect accompaniments to the grasses in both photos. I think the color choices are just beautiful in these pictures. Here's a couple ways that ornamental grasses are being used as a background. When they are displayed at the rear of the bed, the taller grasses can really set off a low perennial border, or they can make a naturalized look in a mixed border. The far left photo, the tall grass really sets off the daylilies, and the switchgrass, it's serving as a good perennial border. The Carl Forster grass, it's a good way to do a kind of a screen or a background. Ornamental grasses have a very fast growth rate, so they can quickly establish a privacy screen in one growing season very economically. Try the blue stem. It's a large variety, or maybe maiden grass, switchgrass would work, the yellow Indian grass would work, or possibly pampas grass if you have the room. The photo on the left-hand side is Carl Forster reedgrass, and it's really upright and very narrow. The one on the right side is one of my favorites, and that is the little blue stem. It is not near as tall, but it can also have the same effect because you can keep it narrow and it stays clumping. When the shorter species are moved to the front of a bed, they can make an effective edge. You may want to plant them a little closer than the recommended spacing, so they will grow together in a nice line. The picture on the right side is one of my favorites. That's Mexican feathergrass, and it is extremely drought tolerant, maybe as high as about 18 to 24 inches. I know that's Mexican feathergrass on the right side. The one on the left side, I'm not sure of exactly which species that is because there's several that could look quite like that. This is an example of ornamental grasses used in mass. Erosion control from ornamental grasses is used commercially, but it can also be a factor in a residential landscape. Waves or grasses through a garden are especially visual, using a species that has a lot of movement, such as Mexican feathergrass. The maiden grass used in that far left photo is on the side of a street, and it's very effective for erosion control. The middle photo is one I took at one of our garden tours, and this lady in this yard, she had planted this love grass, and that yard slopes a lot more than it looks like in this photo, but it was proving very effective for her because her yard required erosion control to maintain it. The Mexican feathergrass on the far right photo is used as a median, and it's being used more and more by municipalities because it's so easy to care for. One of the best examples of a mass planting of an ornamental grass can be found at the Dickies Arena in Fort Worth. Here it is used to control erosion. It makes it look like a meadow, which really fits into the theme of the arena. And I do not know the species of grasses that are on here. I know there was 3 different ones used when they were planning this landscape, but I think they really turned out to be an effective example. A lot of ornamental grasses have interesting golden foliage, and you can keep them this way during the winter, as well as being a place for ice to decorate the leaves. This photo on the left is taken in our demonstration garden, and this foliage stayed this way on this particular specimen. I would think maybe as long as 8 months. And I thought, of course, it was in a very rainy season, the year that I took this photograph. But I think this turned out to be real. This is an example of a Miscanthus sinensis, but I don't know the exact subvariety. And then this one on the right is one I took in my front yard after one of our ice storms, and I thought it really set off the Mexican feathergrass. Here's an example of some of the lower growing varieties. As an edging, you can use this between stepping stones or between flagstone pavers, and it works well with this dwarf mondo grass. Even though it's called a grass. It's not a true grass, but as you can see, it looks like one. The ground cover on the right side, this lower mounding species is Mondo, but it's a little bit taller variety. It works well as a ground cover. You can also use Liriope, and both of these types of grasses are tolerant of shade. And in fact, I don't think they'll do well in full sun. Grasses in containers can create a real whimsical feeling, kind of a woodsy aura, or a formal flair when using modern pots in a sunny patio. The choices are endless. Grasses make a perfect thriller in any pot. The blue fescue on the far one on the left side is a little bit tricky to grow in a Texas hot and dry landscape, but I thought it was really cute in this little whimsical vase planter. The fiber optic grass is one I tried one year in the second from the left photo, and it really provided a good little filler in that pot and good texture change. I think the purple fountain grass in the next one over is the tallest grass, and I think it just works perfect in these large plantings. And then the next one over I think is gorgeous. It has Mexican feathergrass as the tallest specimen in there. Let's talk a little bit about how ornamental grasses grow. First, their life cycle. Most ornamental grasses fall into the perennial category, which means their life cycle is more than 2 seasons. Some can live on for decades. The other type of a life cycle known as planting is an annual. That means that the plant grows from seed. It will seed, grow, flower, and it will die within 1 year. Biennial means the same kind of a cycle, but it takes 2 years. So when you're thinking about ornamental grasses, perennial is the category that most of these are going to fall into. The season of active growth for most ornamental grasses is going to be the warm season. Very few of them fall into what is known horticulturally as a cool season perennial. The growth habit. This is important when you're trying to plant your landscape, and we'll kind of discuss this a little bit more later. Ornamental grasses can grow and spread in what we call running. And this means it spreads with creeping lateral stems. The other growth habit is what we call clumping, which means it grows in tufts and it moves outwardly and it increases in diameter in the one clump. You can see in this illustration, I hope this makes it easier for you to understand, you can see how the possibility of a spreading perennial could be a little bit difficult because it would spread out into surrounding areas that you don't want it to be in. Here's another example of growth habits. I thought these were good illustrations. You can see the clumping, how it grows in a little tuft. Sometimes these are called bunch grasses. And they actually increase in diameter. And they grow outward, and they leave the center of the plant dead. Most of your ornamental grasses are in this clumping category. Generally, the clumping species are those that are recommended. There's also some of the ornamental grasses are called running, spreading, creeping, and these are the kind that can be used as a turf grass. As you know, your common turf grass is Bermuda and St. Augustine. That's the way they grow. They form dense mats that can be invasive, and they can be spread above ground, and when they're above ground, they're called a stolon. When they spread below ground, they're called a rhizome. The rhizome is derived from the Greek word to take root. And an example of a stolon spread is your St. Augustine grass, and an example of the rhizome as well as a stolon, is a Bermuda grass because it spreads both ways. Another thing about the growth habits of perennials is the leaves and stems. They come in all shades of green. They can be fine, or they can be wiry, flat, broad, twisted, folded, curly. Some are soft and some are sharp. The folded types serve a purpose as they slow down evaporation. Their sharp edges can deter foraging by livestock. As fall approaches, the green stems turn to various shades of gold. In the spring, the grass will break dormancy and send new shoots of green stems past the old growth, which has begun to decompose. They do have flowers. The flowers are actually a group of flowers held together by a little spikelet, and that is called an inflorescence. The majority of grasses bloom from May through July, but some can be fall bloomers. Most remain on the plant through the winter. They have seeds and they are formed and dispersed by the wind, and then they fall to the ground. The flower remains, but it's changed. Here's another illustration of the different foliage structure of ornamental grasses. You can see how with so many different varieties, different structures like that from these silhouette pictures, how you can actually use different grasses in one garden and still have some texture type change, some height variation, and so on and so forth. Most of the Texas ornamental grasses you can find with all these forms. Let's talk about planting and care of an ornamental grass. First of all, what is the best time to plant? Spring and summer will always be the best time for an ornamental grass. They form from seed heads. They go dormant in the fall and they resprout and grow in the spring. So you'll get your best growth in the spring. Always consider your site selection very carefully. Measure it very carefully, and always remember the right plant in the right place for your best success. Normally grasses want a sunnier, drier, hotter place. They're not particular about the soil. Your companion plantings need to have the same requirements. It's difficult to have neighboring plants with different needs, especially the irrigation. Specimen selection. The species and variety must be compatible with your climate, your soil, your rainfall, and your sun. Think about that just a minute. Of course, you can grow an ornamental grass in a pot. It's always a possibility. But if you're going to put them in your landscape, you've got to dig a hole. And you dig the hole twice the diameter of the root ball. Leave a very firm bottom or tamp the bottom of the hole firmly so the plant will rest securely and not sink after you plant it. Remember, too high won't die, but too low won't grow. Water the plant. Make sure the plant is in the Make sure the plant in the container is moist. If it's dry, water it before removing it from the container. Next, you remove it from the container. You gently shake it and squeeze it a little bit, and you can kind of hold the container sideways, and this will help. If it's a large plant, especially if it's a large plant laid on its side, you can kind of roll it around a little bit and tap it on the bottom. If the root ball is stuck, you can cut the container by slitting down the sides with tin snips. You can't even cut out the bottom of the container. Place it in the hole before cutting the sides away. Now you want to loosen the root ball. Gently loosen and spread the root ball before you place it in the hole. Hold the blades together. Gather and hold the grass blades and with one hand while holding the root ball with the other hand. Never lift the plant by the grass blades. Hold it from the bottom. You place the plant in the hole, even with the soil grade, possibly slightly above to allow for some settling. Position it vertically, examine it carefully, and then fill the hole up with the backfill soil and slightly tamp. View and make sure your plant's positioned like you want it. Fill the remainder of the hole even with the top of the plant's soil line. Tamp it lightly to be sure it will not sink below the soil grade. A tip: you can plant an ornamental grass in a bottomless container. You just take your container, cut the bottom of it out, and plant it and leave the sides on. This might be a good plan if you have selected a running or invasive species. It'll keep it from invading your neighboring plants and just taking over your whole garden bed. That's what we have done in our Master Gardener demo garden with our spreading varieties. Okay, after you've planted it, irrigate it well so all the air pockets will be closed. Fertilizer. They don't even require fertilizer. We do not fertilize the ornamental grasses in our demonstration garden. We do mulch, and we recommend using an organic mulch that will improve the soil as the mulch decomposes. Mulch will help contain weeds, it will cool the soil, and it will slow evaporation. Mulch is very, very important after planting. Okay, let's talk about one of the maintenance tasks that's required of all ornamental grasses. They don't require much in the way of care. That's a good thing. But however, most of them do need this pruning, and it's called cutting back. So what you do is you actually cut back the dead top growth once a year. They are perennial, which means they're deciduous. It means they're dormant in the winter. So normally you do not prune an evergreen grass look-alike, such as a sedge or a mondo. However, liriope is pruned back, and its new growth will start up as new shoots, just like grasses. What you do is, as the plant goes dormant, it'll turn shades of gold to brown in the fall. The basic rule is to leave them standing over the winter, so you won't have a bare space in your landscape, and some of them are really beautiful with their fall foliage. Some of them, they also provide the winter interest that we talked about before. That way your area in your landscape is not bare. Like some other perennials you have to cut them back as soon as the top is dead, but your grasses you don't have to. They give some winter interest in those spaces. Some grasses may have a little messier look, and you may not like that. And it's okay to trim them back after they go dormant if you want to. The brown top growth can help protect them from freezing, however. Why prune them? Pruning off the dead top growth allows the light and the air to the new shoots so it can grow from the bottom unhindered. The old dead top growth and flower plumes weaken and start to fall away, and they look messy. When do we do this? You prune most of them. They're still in dormancy through about January in this area. You want to prune before they break dormancy, and most of the time that is in February in this area. You may have read that the best time is to wait until the last frost. Sometimes you can have a late frost, as late as March, even after new growth has started. And this is actually a little too late to prune an ornamental grass. So don't wait too long, or you can cut into the new growth tips. That will leave cut-ins, and it will show up all summer, and they're not really nice looking. And also, it can delay some of the new growth. I usually plan this as a February first task. It is okay to trim your grasses during the year if any broken flowering stems appear, and if you just want to kind of clean them up during the growing season. So how do you prune them? If it's not too large, you can tie up the top with twine or bungee cord before cutting, and that kind of eases your cleanup. What you do is you cut measure maybe about 3 or 4 inches above the soil line, and you use a hedge shear, a power hedge trimmer. You can use a weed eater, and some of them you can even use a chainsaw. You just want to leave a few inches, and that will support the new top growth. Ensure that you have not cut too far into the root growth. Taller grasses can be cut straight across, but smaller ones will look better if they're cut in a mounded form. Burning the dead tops of grasses is not recommended because it is dangerous and it may be illegal. Then you follow and chop up your pruned pieces of grass if you're adding them to a compost pile to speed up decomposition. They're a little bit slow to decompose. Here's an example of the grasses just after pruning, and another photo what they look like just after the new growth has started. And on the left side, see how they've been pruned very, very low. You don't get into the root growth, but you want to get them as low as you can. And then in the right picture shows, these are actually the same little mounds, and that shows the new sprouts as they're coming up. And so they start looking, the sprouts will come back, or early March, sometimes late February. And so they make a pretty little filling in your residential area, even though they're low. Since the growth habit of most ornamental grasses anyway, grows from the center outward, meaning that the plant forms new growth on the outside edges, leaves the center to die off. This growth habit results in the need to periodically divide them. When you decide to divide, best time is in the spring, right after that new growth has started. The new growth, if it's very sparse and the majority of the plant is dead in the center, like this first photo, that's a sign that it's time to divide it. Just let the plant kind of show you when it needs to be divided. And this first picture is a good illustration of that. The best time to divide is in the early spring, mid-March to early April. At least in our area, that's the best time. And it's after you've pruned that dead top growth, like we talked about a second ago. The new growth has started. It's best to do it after that new growth starts, because that will show you the location of the dead areas of the plant, as well as the area that you want to keep from your new baby plants. First thing you do is you dig up the entire plant and you allow enough space around the above ground growth so you will have a good root ball. And sometimes it's possible to remove part and leave the remaining live roots in the ground to establish a new plant in that spot. You can chop up the plant with an axe, even if you think you need to, and remove unneeded parts while leaving a small clump in that old hole. You take your live clumps and you can cut them into pieces with a knife after you've pulled them out of the old hole. Make sure you leave a generous amount of the live root and the top growth for each new plant. Discard any dead growth from the prior season. So now you can kind of see why those new clumps of growth are helping you know where to divide. You can repot these new little plants into pots and save them, let them grow, give them away, so on and so forth. Or you can plant them directly into the ground in new areas. Or you can take, if you have not let one of the root areas in the old hole, you can take what you dug up and put it back into the old hole. You want to dispose of the dead center. Goes to the compost pile. Grasses can reseed naturally by seed dispersed by the wind and can be propagated from collected seed. The running form can also propagate from rhizomes. Okay, what happens if you've got an ornamental grass and it's in the wrong place? You don't want it, you didn't like it, so on and so forth. Let's talk a little bit how to get rid of it, the eradication. It can be really stubborn to remove. You may have to use a combination of methods, and you may have to repeat. One way is to dig it up. You cut the top growth off just as far down as you can, and then dig up the root ball. And you may have to dig this up at a section at a time, similar to the way we divided it. And you may have to repeat because it may come back even after your best efforts. Another way to get rid of it is with herbicides such as glyphosate. Glyphosate may not be around, may be taken off the market. So be careful with glyphosate. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. There may be other herbicides that you can use. Always follow the instructions on any of these kind of chemicals. You can make a homemade herbicide. White vinegar and a few drops of dish soap. You spray that on there and see if that will eradicate your plant. Another way to get rid of one, especially maybe if you have a lot of it and it's running, is solarization. This will take longer. The solarization is the process of killing a plant by baking the root system. You cut the plant down as close to the soil as possible. You moisten the surface, cover with a plastic wrap, weigh it down with bricks. Within 4 to 6 weeks, the sun will warm up the soil and kill the entire root system along with any other weeds in the bed. You can try this, see if it works for you. You can try it, but this is one of the recommended ways, especially now with some of the dangers of the herbicides. Let's take a while now to talk about some of the different varieties of ornamental grasses. This slide shows some pictures. I believe I took all these from our demonstration garden. This is big blue stem. It's warm season, of course, like most of them are. It is a bunch grass. It's blue-green, and it can grow 4 to 8 foot tall. The seed head is branches into 3 parts, and sometimes they call it a turkey's foot. The fall color is maroon to tan. The big blue stem is known as a star component of what has been described as the big 4 native grasses. They are part of the tall prairie varieties. And included in that grouping is Indian grass, switchgrass, and little blue stem. This grass is the little blue stem, and I like the way ours looks in the demonstration garden. It is one of the easier grasses to contain. It has fine, slender leaves with just a definite blue cast that make it seem just a little bit softer than some of the others, such as switchgrass or big blue stem. I recommend it for a residential garden. It got its name because of its bluish color, and it does tend to get a little reddish tan in the fall. But this is a really good plant. This is one that I want to add to my garden. This is another blue stem, the silver blue stem. We no longer have a specimen of this to show you in our garden. It was kind of taken over. The switchgrass kind of pushed it aside. But this is another one that is grown occasionally in gardens. 2 to 3 foot tall. It's only 2 foot wide, likes the sun like all of them, and it blooms in the fall, and it's also a Texas native. Switchgrass. It is one of the large ornamentals. It can be used for livestock forage or straw bedding. It's been used in biomass energy production, erosion control. It is also used as a substrate for growing mushrooms. It spreads by rhizomes, and it forms loose, open seed heads that are reddish brown. They turn to pale yellow in the fall. Their wide, slightly curving leaves form along a stem in a bright green. The roots are very deep. This is kind of a famous photo of them. There has been some discussion I've read in other articles that the moisture that they can pull from the soil may not extend, the capability of that from these roots may not extend down to those roots. But this is kind of an element that's under discussion. So this picture of the roots might kind of be an exaggeration, but it is very interesting. The switchgrass has upland and lowland varieties. They're quite a bit different. One of them is a little bit broader. This grass would like to spread. You may want to think twice if you don't have a lot of room. It's very large. Yellow Indian grass. It's one of the big three. It's a Texas native, and it sometimes has kind of a metallic gold sheen in the fall, and it really contrasts greatly with the blue foliage. And I think it's pretty. The foliage is a little bit broader leaf than some. It's one of the taller, especially in a season where it receives a little bit more moisture. It will spread aggressively. It can be contained, but I have chopped and dug some of it to keep it inside its designated area in our garden. Kind of in a mass. It doesn't quite bunch up. This picture of the close-up of the bloom, I think, is really pretty. It's really ornamental, and that bloom stays on just like that for a long time. Here's another grass, the Carl Forster reed grass. We don't have this in our demonstration garden. I wish we did. I have talked with some and think the general consensus is it may not grow in our area as well as we like. I put it in here because it's so pretty, and it's so narrow, and it can be used. It's very upright, and it stays in its clump. It looks a little like wheat. It's very showy. It does not set seed. It was named Perennial of the Year in 2002 by the Perennial Plant Association. And I really like it. I have tried 3 clumps of this year in my yard, and only 1 out of the 3 is doing very well. You can try it. If you can get it to grow, I think it would be a great specimen in a yard. Purple fountain grass. This is a popular grass. You can always find this in a big box store. It is heat tolerant, and it can be grown as a hedge like this one photo shows. It can also serve as a specimen. It works as a back of the border plant. It grows about 3 to 4 foot tall, and it can spread 3 to 4 foot wide. Although the times that I've tried to grow it, I can keep it a little bit narrower than that. The plume flowers they're tall and they're upright, and they kind of stay purple. And they bloom from July through October. It's real easy to grow in any soil, and it'll actually tolerate some light shade. It requires some supplemental water during dry spells, and a light dose of balanced fertilizer on this plant will help it. You can plant it anytime from containers. Cut back the dead foliage to the ground in the fall or spring. It's hardy to only about 20 degrees, so it may not survive in our cold winters. And I have never had it survive through a winter. So especially here, this is our one grass that should be considered an annual, but it's really worth it to plant if you have that special place in your yard to plant it as an annual. Just plant a new one every year. The pink muley. Isn't this one of the most popular grasses? Because in the fall, the display is just absolutely beautiful. It's a good size for a residential landscape. It's only about 3 foot at maturity. Its name is sometimes confused a little bit. The pink muley and the Gulf muley, they're actually the same plant. But there are several varieties found in retail trades. Most of them are some shade of pink or white. It blooms in the fall, and it's really a showstopper. And here is the other Gulf muley, the white cloud muley. And I just had to have one of these. These are pictures out of my yard. I did the 3 growth right when it was out of bloom, when it was starting to bloom, and then in full bloom. it really puts on a pretty show. This is just another variety, one of the Gulf muleys, but this is the White Cloud variety. Okay, the next one you're looking at is called the pine muley. It's one of the smaller grasses, and it is very hardy. It's considered medium-sized, but I kind of consider it smaller. It has done very well with the little irrigation that we have had during our drought summer of 2022 in our demo garden. It has very fine foliage, and it blooms in early fall, and it has 10 flower spikes. I recommend this one highly. The hooded windmill grass. It is a very small perennial and bunch grass. The foliage is very fine. It's a little bitty thing, about a foot tall, and it will flower multiple times over the growing season. It produces heads from May through October, and it is characterized by its little short 3-inch wide windmills. And I love this grass, but the pictures that I've taken, it's now been kind of pushed aside by some of the Indian grass. So I'm going to have to spend a little more time and find some more in it, because it would do very well in a residential landscape because of its size. The purple threon. This grass is beautiful. I really love this one. It's bunch grass. The leaves, they go upward and they kind of roll inward. The seed head is really narrow, nodding, loose, and purplish, with many three-awned spikelets. The second plume is twice as long as the first. The awns are widely spreading. They're nearly equal in length, 1 to 2 inches long. It's also been known or been called needlegrass. The purple threon is perennial. It's warm season. It's a Texas native, 12 to 30 inches tall. It does not provide forage for livestock or wildlife. And if it is grazed, only in the spring when it's very young. Its native habitat is rocky hills, but also sand, and it can increase in overgrazed ranges, even though it's not considered a true forage grass. This is so pretty when it first plumes out in the kind of in the late spring, because it blows in the wind, and it's really pretty. And the purple kind of varies from what looks like here to kind of a light purple. It kind of gets a little bit maroonish. This is one of my favorites in our demonstration garden. Maiden grass. This one is probably the most commonly used in residential landscapes. You can find it in big box stores. You may not find the labels in those stores telling you the subvariety, and that's kind of important because this grass comes in all sizes. I recommend this one highly if you're first venturing into this whole thought of incorporating an ornamental into your landscape. I recommend the one called Adagio. It's called Miscanthus sinensis Adagio. It is the dwarf variety, and it might, in a really good situation, maybe reach 4 foot tall, maybe 4 foot wide. The one in my yard varies depending on the year. This year it's a lot smaller because of the drought. I don't water it very much. I like these because they bloom in mid-spring, and that bloom head stays on it all summer long. So it puts on this display like this summer photo here, and this is a good one to start with. You'd find the Adagio. It's the short one. I think the one that's tall, it's called Graham. I don't even know how to pronounce it. You can go out on the internet, and in the Hoffman Nursery website, there is a Miscanthus comparison chart. And if you really want to look at all the varieties of this grass, you can go to that comparison chart and look, and then go to one of the specialty nurseries and get the exact variety that you want. This one is worth your worth your look at. Side oats grandma. I'm trying to get one of these started in my yard, but I didn't give it a very good start in a pot, so I'm going to have to start over. It's a bunching, kind of a sod-forming type grass, 2 to 3 foot stems. They are erect. They're kind of in wiry little clumps. They can be a little purplish. The little oak-like spikelets, they form early, and they're kind of uniform, but they all line up on one side of the stem. Then later in the year, they kind of bleach to a tan color, closer to the fall. They can turn kind of a purple or reddish. It is a perennial warm season, and it's in clumps. There is some sub-varieties. The reason this grass is so special is it is the Texas state grass, and there is really good specimens of it at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. But the ones in our garden, these are the ones I took pictures of here, they're doing well also. The ones in our garden receive very little irrigation, and they are staying in their clumps. They are not spreading a lot. I recommend this one for a residential garden. Here is another muley. These photographs were also taken in our demonstration garden. It's larger than the others, and it is a standout in our garden. The blooms, they stand a little bit more upright than some of the other muleys, but it is very drought tolerant. If you need a little bit larger one, and you don't have enough room for say, pampas grass, this might be your choice. This is a really good grass. If you've got, 4, I would give this one 4, maybe even 5 foot. If you're going to plant multiple ones, I'd consider maybe as much as a 5 foot center. These particular specimens in this photograph, they were planted in their containers. They were put down in the ground in the containers, and the bottoms were cut out. So these grasses are flourishing, although some of the larger ones, they're ready to be cut back. I hope to do that this year. I highly recommend a Lindheimer muley. The blue grama. I think this thing is really unusual. It is smaller. Even in full flower, it only ranges from 12 to 14 inches tall, making it one of the shortest of the native grasses. It's very fine leaf, and it produces this little blue-green seed heads, and they're kind of suspended horizontally like the little tiny brushes on the tips each stem. The plant turns tan when it's dormant, and the blue grama, it grows in bunches. It is a perennial. It is an important drought season short grass in mixed prairie and throughout the Great Plains, Southwest, and so on. Sometimes it's confused with the hairy grama grass, which has a sharp point. This is one that I believe at one time we had it in our demonstration garden. It has been it has disappeared. I think it's been pushed out by some more aggressive grasses, and I hope to get this started soon. I've seen specimens of it where it's in these kind of groups, mass plantings like this. It's really unusual. It's small. It's a good one for your landscape. The Mexican feathergrass, one that's used a lot now, probably my all-time favorite. I've had it in my yard for years and years. It's kind of delicate. The little thread-like kind of leaf blades, they wave gracefully in the slightest little bit of a breeze. They are so pretty. The little blades, they can be 30 to 70 inches long, although I don't see the variety around here reaching that height. They kind of grow in a V shape, and they kind of weep over, kind of similar to lovegrass. Very, very drought tolerant. Does not like to be kept wet. These photographs, the May is in our demonstration garden right after they bloom out early in the spring. The other picture, May, is my front yard, and I wanted to show where it's reaching a little bit more irrigation. They stay green longer. You see that down in the lower left-hand side of that picture. Then in September, you can see how they're still pretty, even as long as September. they just change color. And then in January, there's my little picture of my yard where the ice was kind of illuminating them. I wanted to tell you a little bit about a precaution. And I think this is just fair to Texas ranchers. They consider this a pest in the rangeland, and they don't understand why. As an ornamental, we really like it, but the ranchers, they think it's dangerous. It establishes really rapidly, and it can crowd out the other forage grasses, and it's real hard to eradicate when it spreads. It spreads not in my yard. I just let it, when it spreads, I just let it grow. It doesn't transplant as well, but it will spread by seed. But it's my understanding that in the rangelands, it causes problems. But I still like it. I think it's such a pretty ornamental. This little dwarf fountain grass, and I think you pronounce that Hamlin, but I might be pronouncing it incorrectly. This is a common one you see in the big box stores and, of course, all the specialized nurseries. It's real fine textured, and it has little spikes. It has bright green foliage, changes to tan in the fall, and the little bottle brushes. They're really pretty when they come out, little plumes. This one does not come back as aggressively as I wish it did. We tried some of them in our demonstration garden, and over the two severe winters we've had recently, they didn't survive. But I'm going to plant them again. I think they're pretty. Even if you do have to plant them as an annual, I think they're still worth it as a border plant. Here is the seep muley. The picture on, excuse me, I think both pictures out of our demonstration garden, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong. That one on the left may not be. The one on the right is. I just love this little plant. It only grows about 1 to 3 foot tall, and it kind of has dense little tufts. They're kind of slender little stems, and the foliage kind of plumes out, and the heads are kind of delicate, purplish. They kind of branch out and they weep over. It's sometimes said to resemble a little bit less pink version of the Gulf pink muley, but it is most distinctive in the curly mass of old leaf blades that kind of accumulate at the base of the grass as it gets older. It makes a wonderful plant for a meadow, especially if there's a little moisture, such as a seep. Prefers dry to moist soil. The specimen in our garden is very dry, and it has just gone through this past hot summer just in the greatest condition with very little irrigation. I love this plant because it stays small. It stays in its boundaries. This would be a great one to try. Here's a few of the grasses that will survive in a shady area. The sedges, they're kind of grass-like looking, but they're not a true grass. Their genus is called Carex, C-A-R-E-X. There is more than 2,000 varieties of this particular plant. The one found here is a Carex texinus, and it's known as the Texas sedge. They are low-growing, maybe about 12 inches. The one in my yard probably is not quite 12. I love it. It's like this little chartreuse one. Matter of fact, this, I think, is the one out of my yard, the little chartreuse one. Then the variegated one is, and then there's a green one. There, with 2,000 varieties, you can probably get them any color of the rainbow. They're perfect for the front of a shady border. Very narrow leaf blades. That's what makes them so pretty. And they kind of mound up. They're evergreen. You do not cut these back in the spring. They don't sprout from the new growth. They're most active in the spring. They slow down a little bit in the summer heat. Supposedly they're drought tolerant, but the one I have seems to like the moisture. It's next to an area that requires a little bit moisture. It gets a little bit of filtered sun. It has been very frost tolerant. It's lived through these bad winters. This is a good one for the shade, for a low area, and that's what a lot of residential landscapes kind of need. You're always looking for something to put in a little bitty space. The inland sea oats, they are one of the few ornamentals that prefer shade as well. They're native to our area and they do well here. Their name comes from a resemblance to sea oats that are native to the coastal areas, but this is our version. Their distinguishing characteristics is their little drooping chevron-shaped heads that grow. They go from kind of green to golden during the season. 2 to 3 foot wide and high, they clump. I think they will spread. They prefer shade. I think they will spread a little bit. I think this is one you need to watch. You might want to put it in a place where you can have a little more control over it. We have it in a shady, kind of a dry area in our demonstration garden. There is beautiful clumps of this at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. Here is grass-like grasses. Shouldn't call them grass-like grasses. I should call them grasses for shade, like I have on here. These are shade lovers. I wouldn't attempt any of these in a full, hot, dry sun. The Mondo, it's evergreen. It's used as a ground cover. It comes in a little dwarf variety, but the dwarf variety is not as quick to cover. You do not cut it back in the spring. It does not come back from new sprouts. There is 2 sizes, both of them are on here, the dwarf and then the regular Mondo. The regular Mondo is a little bit more aggressive grower that I have found, but it can be controlled. You can keep it in a space. It's not so aggressive that it's very hard to control. The Liriope, it's sometimes called lily turf. I think that Liriope is pronounced different ways. I think I've heard people pronounce it liriope. It's sometimes called monkey grass too. It's not a true grass, but it looks like one. It's been around a long time. Some people consider it old-fashioned. I don't. I consider it just a good plant to use in certain places. It is a tall ground cover. There are sub-varieties of this plant. It will tolerate the shade, but you can put it in a sunny location as well. It's very, very reliable. A precaution on this plant. There is 2 sub-varieties or more. Be careful. I would always buy the clumping form. One of them is called Big Blue, because you can get a form that spreads like crazy. And in most flower beds, you wouldn't want it because it can just take over. So always look for the clumping form of Riope if you're going to try it. Okay, as we kind of draw to a close here, I just wanted to kind of go over, as in kind of a conclusion. Remember your ornamental grasses. They're really good for the environment. Let's consider them just for that benefit, if for nothing else. They're very, very versatile. There's many ways you can use them in your landscape. They're budget friendly. Their care and management and their planting is easy. There's a lot of different species and varieties to choose from. You can come and view them at our Tarrant County Master Gardener Demonstration Garden. We are located at 1801 Circle Drive. If you want to come in and just look at the garden and you'd like for one of us to be there, most of the time on Tuesdays there'll be someone at this garden. And anybody, it's open to the public, anybody can come and view them if you want to see what one of these specimens looks like in person. This is just a list of some of my sources, some of my recommended sources. You might want to make a screen print of this. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of it from, a lot of what I've discussed is from my personal experience. But there's a lot of information out there. There's more all the time. I'd recommend you maybe utilizing some of these websites, books, subscriptions, so on and so forth.